everybody, and welcome to the Aggieville Alleycats podcast, where come rain, shine, or anything in between. We're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. I'm Ace Edwards, right alongside
Connor Balzor.
And welcome to conference play, ladies and gentlemen, where Kansas State is going to open up their season in the Big 12 slate on the road, a tradition unlike any other. At least this time it isn't at Oklahoma in some way, shape, or fashion. But they are going down to Provo, Utah, one of the most scenic destinations in the United States, to go up against the Brigham Young University Cougars. So it is, once again, another catfight.
Yeah, what they lack in vices, they surely make up for in great mountain views. So for anybody that's going, hopefully it's a great time. I hope you're able to survive without much in the way of libations or caffeine or anything. But I guess I'm going to pretty much the complete opposite, and because I'm going to the Colorado game where it's definitely not lacking in that department. So
yeah, try not to die, man.
I hope I don't get batteries thrown at me. That's my number one goal.
Objective one, survive.
Yeah, I may start saving my Xbox controller batteries so I can return fire if need be.
But before we get into the scouting report for BYU, we do want to thank the sponsors of today's episode, and that is Greg, Arthur, and Grandma.
Thank you, Grandma.
And if you want to have your name read out at the beginning of every single episode, it takes as little as $1 to support the show, and you get your name read out, and you have our undying gratitude. So win-win scenario. But let's just go ahead and dive straight into the BYU Cougars football team. And I'm going to say it. I know how many times this has come back to haunt me in the past. In fact, it seems to happen twice a year. So I'm just going to get it out of the way now. I don't think BYU is very good. That's my opening stance.
And what's nice about that, though, as an opening stance, is that if we do lose, we do know who to blame.
Yeah, it's on me. I will own it. But if you look at the schedule that BYU has played up to this point, they destroyed an FCS team in Southern Illinois, fine. They barely scraped by SMU in one of the worst football games I've ever seen. And yet they somehow do worse, they personally do better, but they make the game feel worse when going up against Wyoming, beating them 34-14. Now, you have an FCS team, a SMU that is cosplaying as a Power 4 team, and then one of the worst teams in FBS. I think Wyoming will be one of the worst teams in FBS this year, because their quarterback went into the game as the starting option, presumably their best option, with a 45% completion percentage. And it took them a quarter and a half to get a first down. So they quite literally have not played anyone with a pulse.
Yeah, I mean, they lost 48-7 to Arizona State. And I was about ready to start believing in Arizona State after they beat Mississippi State, but then Mississippi State went out and got blitzed at home by Toledo. So I now am back to reserving my opinion for future designation on Arizona State. But yeah, I guess all those teams out west, there's it's tough to say, but one thing we can be pretty sure of is that Wyoming is bad. So, but luckily
we know that for sure. We don't have to play them, so we can call them bad all we want because they are awful. But I don't know, Connor. Before you start off with offensive scheming, what are sort of your vibes around this BYU team?
Well, around the team, this feels like a pretty typical post Zach Wilson BYU team. They really want to run the ball, even though they're not very good at it. They really like to just chuck a deep ball sometimes, and for some reason, they always seem to have a receiver that can make it work. But at the end of the day, this is a team that I think really wants to have Zach Wilson as its quarterback and keeps pretending it does. And then when they remember that they don't, they go back to averaging like 3.5 yards a carry, which is checks notes not sustainable for an entire season, and it is not indicative of a great running game. So I this definitely isn't the best team on our schedule remaining, but the circumstances surrounding this game uh, don't necessarily make me super comfortable because we're coming off of a huge ranked win against a team with a good quarterback and one of the best receiver in college football, other than maybe Travis Hunter in Arizona. But this is going to be a night game in Provo where they historically have made some weird things happen, and additionally, this is a really it's going to be a loud environment. It's going to be a high elevation environment too. So there's all sorts of weird things that could just make one or two things break the wrong way in this game. So that worries me a little bit going into it.
Yeah, I agree. Like, because it's more the surrounding circumstances that worry me. Elevation, first conference road game in a conference where even if like even the worst team, I believe, in the Big 12 could beat the best team in the Big 12 if if the first team has just an okay day. Like, I truly believe that anyone can beat anyone in this conference, regardless of the quality of the actual team, especially on the road. I mean, college football itself is crazy, and the Big 12 is just the insane asylum in the middle of hell. So,
I mean, if that Georgia Kentucky game wasn't proof that like the top of a conference in any conference is like vulnerable, like on the road, if they like aren't on their A game, and Georgia was certainly not on their A game, like I don't think there's any better proof than that game in particular.
yeah, case in point made. Connor, you have the beginning. Well, you can just take all the offensive schemes here, and I'll dive in when necessary, which is basically after the first 2 points.
Yeah. So we've kind of indicated this a little bit, but they are a traditional offense. At least they lean more towards that style. They prioritize running the ball maybe more than a lot of other schools will, and they run a lot of 12 personnel. They still do have sets from 11 and 10, though. So it's not fully a ground and pound offense, but they are very committed to the run game. Which has been particularly interesting since last year, because last year they were notably bad at running the ball to the point where pretty much anytime I watched a BYU game, you could hear the commentators talking about how bad they were at running and how they wanted to like get better at it. And
Three
they
and a
changed
half
nothing.
yards a carry. Three and a
Yes,
half yards a carry.
yes, and nothing ever really changed on that front. But on their running game, though, it is multiple. So you can't just line up and just like expect the same thing over and over. You know, like they're not good at it, but they aren't stupid. Is basically the point here. They are trying. The running game, it's multiple, but they do lean towards going under center and running some outside zone, which we've seen a decent amount of outside zone already this year. Tulane ran a decent amount of it, and Arizona went under center some as well and ran some heavy run packages too. So this isn't stuff that we haven't seen yet.
Yeah, and despite the fact that it's stuff we haven't seen yet, it BYU is honestly probably worse at it than Tulane was because they don't have Mekhi Hughes, and they're averaging 4.1 yards per carry. And honestly, that's being carried by a lot of guys who have maybe 5 carries, and their leading rusher is currently their quarterback, and he only has 113 yards on the ground. It's their running game, and the weird thing is that, and we'll get into it more towards like the very end of talking about their offensive scheming, but it it really just comes down to they sort of know what they want to do, but they don't really know how they want to go about it. They want to establish the run and they want to have those play action shot plays or the play action over the middle. The thing is, they can never establish the run because they don't know what type of run they want to establish.
Yeah. But speaking of their passing game, though, they do have some of your prairie traditional college football staples. They run a lot of mesh and they run smash. We are going to see that pretty much every single week. But they also blend it into some traditional pro style play action where they are pretty much cutting the field in half. They're the type of offense that prefers to face off against man coverage because, like we've indicated already, BYU does place a maybe reckless amount of trust in their wide receivers, which isn't necessarily baseless. They do have some quality receivers, so they can hurt you some in that department.
Yeah, and the only other thing is there's one play call in particular that I think they ran up against Wyoming twice and SMU twice, where it's like a really unique tight end screen because they really, as much as you wouldn't think it looking on the catch numbers, a lot of their sort of more traditional passing game where they aren't just, saying screw it, the guy's down there somewhere, goes through their tight ends. And they have this little drag screen that's I just think it's kind of neat because obviously you have trips to one side and they're just staring at their guy until the drag comes open and then they start blocking. So, I mean, I just think it's kind of neat. Is it effective? Not really, but it's kind of neat.
Well, I mean, that's half the battle with an offense is making it look cool. I mean, if you're not going to be successful, you might as well be entertaining while you do it. So
true.
But on this offense, though, outside of that specific play not working, their biggest issue is going to be that they're feast or famine, but that's mostly famine. They have a really bad third down conversion rate. It's 28%, which is just horrid. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that despite them having plays that they run, they don't really have a whole lot in the way of an offensive identity. They have a lot of ideas that they've mashed together, but there's not a lot of coherence. They try to run the ball a ton, but they only have one guy with over 100 yards rushing, and that's their quarterback. So not the best situation. In fact, he's got the most carries and most yards, and he's averaging more per carry than their next closest running back, and that includes him losing 22 yards on 3 sacks this year as well. And then similar boat for receiving. Most of their receiving is going to one guy, and that's Chase Roberts. He's their only receiver who has double-digit receptions this year. And he also is the only wide receiver over 100 yards on their roster. In fact, he's the only receiver on their roster is over 200 yards. He has 15 catches for 263 yards, so almost one Tet McMillan game. But they don't have anybody else that's really in the same universe in terms of receptions or yards on their roster. And despite that, Chase Roberts also doesn't have a touchdown yet this year, which is kind of strange.
Yeah, and you touched on it, but I really do. A part of what makes BYU such a difficult team to scout is with every single team that we have faced off against so far, and honestly, most every team that we've done a scouting report on for basically the duration of the show, they've had some kind of identity. Baylor was always going to be the wide zone pro style offense, quote unquote. I mean, UT Martin this year was going to try and be efficient with their passing game. Arizona was Tet McMillan and Noah Fafita destroying worlds. Tulane has Mensa, who, if nothing else, is going to try and bomb you deep off of play action. All of those teams have had an identity. This BYU team just doesn't. I don't, and it's not when I say this, I say I don't know what they're trying to be. I don't mean that in the Oklahoma State where the first 3 games of the season don't count because they turn into a different team and they're just either hiding a lot or decide to randomly be good. I don't even really think that BYU knows what their identity is supposed to be. And that is what makes them such a difficult team to scout, but not in the way that makes them a difficult team to face.
Yeah, it's a definitely a weird position to be in as a squad, particularly as a Power Four squad. Uh, you would think that they might have a little bit of a stronger identity, but I think maybe it just gets back to maybe some uh, shortcomings at important positions. Which with that, we can go ahead and start to get into their notable players. So it's before we start with that, though, we're going to start with who they probably will not have. Last week in their Wyoming game, they were down to running back 4 on their depth chart due to injury. We don't know the extent of those injuries and if those players are going to be back or not, but they may very well end up in a running back by committee situation yet again this upcoming week, which for a team that already has historically kind of struggled in the running game, the last thing that you want is to be in a situation where they are completely kind of rudderless and they're lacking depth significantly. Like last week, they ran the ball 28 times, but nobody had more than 8 carries in that game. So not a good position to be in if you're BYU. But we'll refocus here and get into their quarterback, Jake Retzloff. He's a lot of things, but the best way to describe him, though, is he is a very typical project college quarterback. He played a little bit last year. He's a junior, but he is definitely got some shortcomings. He's got a rocket arm. He's somewhat mobile. He has the ability to scramble, but pretty much everything else in this game is pretty mediocre or really bad. In his case, for Retzloff, that is, decision making and accuracy are pretty rough for him. He's only thrown 3 interceptions, which is already a little bit high for this point in the year, but it probably should be even more. At that double, just that from the Wyoming game, because he's thrown for a lot of yards. BYU quarterbacks, it seems like, always are able to get some decent chunk yardage, but he's it's a bit of a tough start for Retzloff in most areas on the field, particularly accuracy and decision making, which those are not 2 things you want to be struggling with heading into conference play.
No, I mean, you can how to describe it. Jake Retzloff is basically what happens when you put throw power up to like 97 and then just leave everything on default. Like he's just not. He's good throwing the ball. He's good at throwing the ball. He's just not very good at playing quarterback, which that is a very important distinction to make.
Yeah. He, again, we've said it a lot already. He's very trusting of his wide receivers. Like if you're in a one-on-one situation, like the ball is going to you. The problem is though, like he just doesn't have the accuracy to justify his confidence. And then as part of trusting his receiver, he also really likes to lock in on one read and then decides that it might be time to go. He's only hit a check down like 3-ish times. Like he's not much in the way. He's not a huge fan of processing, I guess is the best way to put it, which again, not exactly a fantastic trait for a quarterback to have, particularly in a Power 4 conference. So a little rough there.
Yeah, and I mean, he has a 60% completion percentage, and you look at NFL, and that's like a mediocre starting quarterback. Whenever you get to below, I'd say probably 63% completion percentage in in college, you're getting into that bad territory. He's at 60.6. 65, I'd say, is where you start getting good. And he's at that number with about 14% of his passes being behind the line of scrimmage. He's, and, granted, to be generous to him, perhaps some of that could be the fact that he's constantly trying to push the ball downfield. Because I mentioned he has 14% of behind the line of scrimmage. He's throwing the ball deep 15% of the time. So if you're one-on-one, he's throwing you this pill. That's just what's going to happen. But that's really his entire game, is trusting his receivers to make big plays. And if his first read isn't there, he's probably going to try and scramble. Or if the check down is literally running directly in his face, maybe he'll hit the check down. But Retzloff is one of those passers that I just don't see it with him. Like, I don't. And granted, I think it might just be a BYU offense thing, because Keaton Slovis went from, pretty solid quarterback to who the hell is this guy? He's trash, while he was at BYU. And Keaton Slovis had talent. I don't think Retzlaff has nearly the talent that Slovis had. He has a better arm, but he's lacking in every other area.
Yeah, I think that's a good bow to put on Jake Retzlaff. But we'll move next into all of the wide receivers. Yes, it is all of them. But it's not because they're all bad or they're all incredible. It's because they're mostly the same player. We've come to start using the term Sunbelt receiver for tall receivers who are fast, who have spotty hands and run like 5 routes. And like one of them is a zero route and the other one is a post. So then they just like pick 3 others like for some wild cards. But Chase Roberts, though, is the best of the group. He's very clearly Jake Retzlaff's favorite target. He is, though, I'm not an like elite player, but he is a good player that mostly uses bullying the corner to make his way to the ball. Again, not a bad receiver. I mean, there's a reason that he's got almost triple the yardage of the next closest receiver on the roster. But he's not Ted McMillan.
No, he is not. He is very tall and he is pretty fast and he does have the ability to make contested catches. So I don't want to write him off as, he's just another guy, because he's definitely the best receiver on the roster. And he is a very good receiver. The thing is that everyone else just sort of blends together. And we saw that not even a Ted McMillan can save a roster of receivers that all sort of blend together, because they either have the exact same skill set or they're just not that good at separating. And that's always been the weakness with, as we've coined it, Sunbelt receivers. It's always been the issue of separating. Yeah, they will make the splash play. Yes, they will make the occasional contested catch. But then they'll drop the 3-yard bullet slant. And then they won't get open for the rest of the game. So it really is like just Justin Fields with the Bears condensed into a wide receiver, where if you watch the highlights, you're like, wow, that guy's really, really good. And then you watch them play and you're like, wow, I really wish that I was just watching the highlights right now. But I don't want to, downplay Chase Roberts, because he is really good. He honestly has an argument for being one of the better true physical bully ball receivers in the conference. It's just really unfortunate that he has to try and take that title away from people like Ted McMillan, because no one is taking that title from Ted McMillan. And he got his last week, but Arizona still got manhandled.
Yeah. So still some receivers that we'll need to definitely keep track of. but definitely not on the level of Ted McMillan, luckily. So we won't have to be quaking in our boots every time that they drop back to pass, at least not as much. But that takes us out of the offense and into the defensive scheming. On defense, they are multiple and aggressive. Those are the best words to describe the defense. They throw a lot of different looks at teams, and they change those looks at the drop of a hat as well. So they'll come out in a hybrid 4-2 on one snap, a 3-3 stack on another, and then they'll bring all-out pressure the next play, which that's an actual sequence of defensive calls from their game against SMU. Perhaps their willingness, though, to change looks is the reason that they've been so effective on third down. They're only allowing conversions 31% of the time. So they've had some success on defense this year.
Yeah, and speaking of their success on defense, they also have a top 20 red zone percentage in their favor. And a large part of that is sort of their willingness to give you 14 different looks in a game and then just say, figure it out. And most of the time, the weakness with showing people a bunch of different looks is your defense sometimes doesn't even know what they're doing. But BYU doesn't really have that problem. They're very, very well coached on defense. They're not a team that's going to blow a bunch of assignments, which is really important when you blitz as often as they do, because boy, oh boy, as a mixture with those looks that they're going to give you, they're almost always going to send someone from some unexpected angle, whether it be a linebacker, sometimes even a safety or a slot corner. They want to their goal is to scare you and to make you sort of start second guessing yourself. And a big part of them being multiple, also they blend their coverages between man and zone, though again, slight preference for zone, a lot of zone blitzing, especially when they start throwing more exotic looks at you, which again, their entire game plan is misdirect and attack. And they're very, very good at that. I don't think BYU is a bad defensive team because it's the inverse of their offense. Their defense has an identity, and that identity is aggression, aggression, aggression.
Yeah. So they're already well ahead of the offense in that respect, at the very least. That'll take us into their notable players, and that's led by Tyler Beatty. He's a defensive end with really great size, 6'5", 275, and he's a projected day 3 pick as of now. He's got 15 sacks in his career, including 5.5 last year, and hasn't registered one yet this season, although he should have gotten half of a sack against SMU. He's definitely far and away their best true pass rusher. He has a good blend of technique and a few moves that you can break out, most notably spins and swims. He doesn't have the true athletic profile, though, that keeps teams worried about him as a true power rusher. But that's not a knock against him whatsoever. He's still a fantastic pass rusher in his own right, and you don't get to that point, and you don't get to being a projected NFL pick at all if you aren't able to hack it at least a little bit on defensive line. That, and he's also got a lot of experience too. He's a 5th-year senior, and he has played all the way back in 2020, where he had 4 sacks in that shortened COVID season. So he's a really well seasoned player. He's a great veteran, and he'll be a handful for the offensive line to handle.
Yeah, and I hate to be flippant, but that's pretty much it for the really notable players on their defense. I mean, you could talk about their leading tackler, Harrison Taggart, who's fine. He's a solid tackler, really, really good general run defender, but, it's just Blake Martinez again. But they only have 6 sacks on the year. None of, like you said, They should have gave him half. They should have given Beatty half of a sack against SMU. But a big part of why you'll see they have 3 interceptions, I think it's like 13 passes defended or something like that, is just because they're going to try and scare you. They're not going to get home a lot because they're going, or I shouldn't say that they're not going to get home a lot. They aren't going to instantly get the sack, basically. But they're going to scare you into making a quick and poor decision. So in a lot of ways, this is not an ideal matchup because who is most prone to making bad decisions under pressure? It's young quarterbacks. But we'll talk more about that in honestly probably a minute or two. But I don't want to say it's all scheme, but there's no one player on this defense that you say, okay, like that is their star guy. Even Batty or Beatty, depending on how the announcers feel like saying it nowadays. But even he is just pretty solid. And a lot of that comes with the fact that they rotate a lot. I mean, they have more than their fair share of people getting upwards of 60 to 70 snaps or have gotten that many up to this point just because they want to rotate. They want to keep varying looks. And that makes it hard to have one particular star on your defense. But again, it all comes down to they want to scare you into making that bad decision by not letting you know what you're looking at. And then the moment that you think you have it figured out, they're sending pressure from an unexpected. Yeah.
I got nothing else to add. I mean,
so that pretty much does it for the individual players. So now I feel it's best to just kind of go into the storylines to watch. And I feel that the most important one is how does K-State respond to this list of factors? We'll just list the things that kind of make me nervous about this game. First conference game happens to be on the road. We haven't been to Provo, I don't think, in the past like 20 years, or if ever. We haven't been to Provo, at least in this cycle with this team. It's a team that is going to have pretty good to solid fan support. It's going to be a really, really stupidly late game. Even in Utah, it's going to be like 8:30 when the game kicks off. So how does K-State respond to that myriad of factors when combined, especially on defense, when combined with how often they're just going to change things up on the offense?
First thing I'll say is you're right. K-State has not been to Provo in a long time. Last time they were there was 1977. So it's been a while. They did play BYU in the Cotton Bowl. It was the 97 Cotton Bowl for the 96 season. They lost that game 19-15. But so this will be the first time K-State's played BYU in a while. First conference game on the road, I honestly imagine pretty much the entire roster's used to it at this point. So I don't know that'll matter too much like on its own. I think the specific location of where they're going to be, as opposed to just the mere fact that they are starting away from home, may do a little bit more. Although there is also still, we had that Arizona game at home last week. And that, I mean, even though it wasn't a conference game, it
had the vibes of one.
It had the vibes of one because Arizona's in the conference. So it certainly may have felt like a conference opener. But I do worry a little bit about the elevation. I do worry a bit about BYU's crowd at night because I've heard that they do have a really great crowd at nighttime. But hopefully this team is mature enough to be pretty well prepared for that sort of thing going into this game. It also helps, I think, that they've already had a true road game against Tulane where they really gritted out a tough win. So they've already felt some adversity on the road. I'm hoping that they can take that and apply it to this BYU game.
Yeah, and I feel pretty similarly to you. I it's just a matter of, I don't think that this team is going to have any maturity problems where they're going to, go somewhere and, oh, the game's late. Oh, it's a good crowd. We're not used to playing here. I don't think that they're just going to roll over and die just because there's a few things working against them. It's just, I think that it can force more mistakes. And it's just a matter of if BYU can capitalize on this mistake or on any mistakes that are made. Because, spoilers, any formula that has BYU winning this game almost certainly involves multiple defensive touchdowns. Because I don't think their offense is going to do anything outside of maybe like one or two splash plays or maybe a trick play here or there. But speaking of, or at least K-State's offense, how do you expect Connor Riley and Matt Wells to sort of attack this defense?
That's a great question. Hopefully it involves more Dylan Edwards, but I guess that's a whole other separate storyline, so I won't spend too much time talking about that. I'd imagine that we'll be seeing, particularly early in the game, some quicker patterns for Avery to throw to. I bet we see a lot of checkdowns in this game as well, just given the amount of pressure. But also with that amount of pressure, if we maybe keep a running back in or keep a tight end in on a particular pass play, keep an extra blocker, we could potentially see some pretty explosive plays, particularly with Avery's ability to keep a play extended. I'm really hoping that maybe we take advantage of that if we ever get like a second short on our left hash, whichever way we're going, because Avery will have plenty of room to roll, and second short's the best time to take a shot. So maybe a situation like that, we could see a big time play for K-State. But in short, I'd imagine that we're going to keep things in the short and intermediate, particularly early in the game, just because we know how aggressive they'll be, and try and get Avery in a rhythm earlier.
Yeah. I think that this game is going to be a uniquely good time for Matt Wells' experience to come into play, because what is one of the most effective ways to beat the blitz / get a team to stop blitzing? It's the screen game. And there's one thing I know for damn sure. Matt Wells can design a screen game. And I feel like Connor Riley will sort of have that trust to call those screens because, he has before already this season, in fact. But I would expect a pretty healthy dose of the screen game, probably from multi-back looks, so that way they sort of have to tip their hand one way or another. BYU's defense, that is, sort of has to tip their hand which side they're going to be prioritizing in the run. But outside of that, I think that the main game plan for Connor Riley and the winning game plan is don't let BYU sort of settle into that constant pressure that they're used to bringing, because that's exactly what SMU and Wyoming both did. They sort of settled into a game plan where BYU constantly blitzing was the winning formula. So if Connor Riley and Matt Wells can scheme up a game where that just is the losing formula, and I think Connor Riley is more than capable of drawing up a running game that's good against the blitz because I've watched him do it for years. But I think that's going to be sort of the winning formula for K-State. Force BYU to not blitz, basically, because they're going to get dusted if they do. Don't get me wrong, you're not going to force them into a single defensive look. That's just not going to happen. They won't let you do that. But it is possible for them to sort of take off the throttle a little bit with sending extra pressure. But speaking of a little extra pressure, what do you think K-State's game plan is going to be against an offense that is not good?
I imagine we don't see as much heavy pressure as we did against Arizona. I think there may be a little bit more confidence that 3 or 4 can create some consistent pressure against BYU. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to see a lot of aggressiveness, because I don't think that's possible for Joe Klanderman. I think that will still be trying to put Retzlaff under a lot of pressure in this game. But we brought a ton of blitzes against Arizona and Noah Fafita. And I think that in this game we may see that a little less. I think we may be a little bit worried about getting beaten over the top, because that is going to be the one area where BYU is going to have a shot. I think is the explosive plays over the top, because that is something that they're totally fine with doing, is taking a lot of shots. So I imagine we'll see a little bit less aggressiveness, but still blitz plenty.
Yeah, if I were Joe Klanderman, this would be the one game on the schedule where I would be willing to sort of, I don't want to say kick back a little bit, because that's not the message that I'm trying to send. What I'm trying to say is you don't need to send a whole lot of pressure to make Retzlaff make a mistake. He's going to do that on his own. Like that's just who he is as a quarterback. Going to take particularly good care of the football, and he's going to try and force the issue on one-on-one matchups. You don't need to blitz to make him do that. Those are normally things that you send extra heat to do. He just does that out of the box, which is a very, very good thing for the K-State defense. And very similarly to you, I don't think that Klanderman is going to completely step off the gas. But this is a game where he doesn't need to constantly pedal to the metal the entire time to force a mistake. But I think we're getting to that time where it's time to talk about offensive and defensive MVPs. I think I went first last time on defense, so you go first on defense this time.
Okay. I think my defensive MVP in this one, I got to roll with Marquise Siegel. I think that he's been a little quiet to start this year, and he's had some decent moments and he's had some rough moments, but I think that this is a great game for Siegs to get things turned around, because we've seen Jordan Riley had a pretty solid game last week, and VJ Payne has had his moments too, but I think it's about time for Marquise Siegel to step up into the path that was kind of laid for him this offseason, where he was really hyped up all year.
Yeah, I think Siegs is a really, really good pick. I'm actually going to go with Austin Romaine, because I still think that Klanderman is going to constantly bring, 3 or 4. And I think Romaine's probably the best true, not expected blitzer, because I think 9 times out of 10 teams are just betting that Dez is going to be blitzing. But with a run game that is already going to struggle, the best thing for Austin Romaine to do is to utilize his best skill set, which is coming downhill, immediately disrupting any running game that they're going to try and get going, and then still be able to find that gap as it develops in a passing situation. So I think that this is a game plan in a game where Austin Romaine, he's arguably been the best player on the defense the entire year up to this point, which again, generational Aggieville Alleycat evaluatory L. But I really think that he has the potential to, I don't want to say shut down the BYU offense all by himself, but he has the potential to get pretty damn close. But in terms of offensive MVP, I think it'll be a difficult game for Avery, because a part of their blitzing is they're going to try and keep any holes from forming, so that way he has trouble scrambling. So who is the best option to sort of get them out of that blitz scenario? Well, it's the guy who can run faster than everyone else. So my pick for offensive MVP is going to be Dylan Edwards. Now, the hilarious thing is, I genuinely see a world where Dylan Edwards is the offensive MVP with basically the exact same amount of touches that he has been getting. However, I think that this is an amazing game to sort of get him more of those touches because BYU, it doesn't matter where you look, they do not have a single solitary soul who is capable of containing Dylan Edwards. They just don't have that guy. So I think Dylan Edwards is going to be the X factor to sort of make BYU take a second guess from blitzing, which is really going to open up the rest of the offense for everyone else.
Yeah, you took my pick here. I was going to roll with Dylan Edwards, and I was going to create a whole nother storyline to watch out of it because despite how great he was last week, he still didn't really get enough offensive touches, I think. I only touched the ball 7 times on offense. I complained about it less loudly because he had the punt return touchdown, so I felt that they earned my respect a little bit, but not my satisfaction. So I'm hoping that he is able to get some more touches this week on offense. But I'll pick somebody different just because you went with Dylan Edwards. I'm going to roll with Jace Brown this week. I think he's a receiver that we could utilize in the screen game. If we're not going to just use running backs, I'd love to see us run like a middle screen with Jace, get him into the middle of the field and have him start making people miss. I think that's something that he could be really effective at. So if we're going to run short or if we're going to pass short, I should say, I think that's a potential option to look out for. But I think that this could be a week where wide receivers maybe have a bit of a breakout.
Yeah, I also think that the wide receivers could be a little bit freed just by virtue of they're sending more people into the blitz pattern, less people in coverage, but now is the moment everyone has been waiting for. And we'll sort of split this up a little bit more than we have been doing before, and we'll finish off with our score predictions. But Connor, K-State wins if
K-State wins if they stay out of their own way, I think. And I don't mean to say that all as disrespect towards BYU, because this is going to be a tough environment to play in, and it's going to be a difficult adjustment for K-State. I just mean it, and I think that this K-State team matches up really well with what BYU is trying to do and wants to do. So I think if K-State is able to stick to the game plan against BYU and just take care of the simple stuff and no stupid penalties, limit turnovers, or at the very least win the turnover battle, I think that this should be a win for K-State.
you basically took what I was going to say, which was stay out of their way. So I will or stay out of their own way. So I'll go with keep a solid rotation on both sides of the ball. And it doesn't only have to do with the altitude, but a lot of times defenses are equipped to beat the offenses that are on their same team, which sounds strange, but it's weirdly how a lot of times it ends up working. So I think establishing a good rotation, showing different looks, but not necessarily sending 87 blitzes out of them is a really, really good formula for K-State. And I think on the offensive side of the ball, they have to first and foremost make BYU take their foot off the gas a little bit to open up everything else that I know Connor Riley and Matt Wells want to do with Avery Johnson. But Connor, K-State loses if
BYU establishes the run in this game, I think K-State could be in for a very, very, very long night because BYU very clearly wants to establish the run and seemingly continues to really struggle with doing that. They weren't even able to really do it against Wyoming. So if K-State allows it, then we could really be in trouble, I think.
Yeah, K-State loses if they make very, very silly mistakes and if they continually have busts in coverage like they had up against Tulane, which, don't misunderstand, I do think Tulane is a better team than this BYU team. And I don't think that K-State will have those same coverage busts. But BYU is a Power 4 team. It's going to be a tougher environment with higher altitude, though maybe the altitude is very similar to the humidity because down in New Orleans, it's like you're breathing in water like you have gills. So maybe it doesn't matter. But I think it just comes down to K-State not having their A game and maybe looking ahead to their next matchup up against Oklahoma State. BYU is a team you do have to take seriously, even if they don't have an offensive identity, because their defense is good and confusing enough to make a defensive score and then make their life and make the offense's life miserable. So basically, don't let BYU snowball their advantages against K-State and take care of the football. So, Connor, it's the time that everyone always waits for. What is your official prediction for the Kansas State Wildcats going down to Provo?
I think K-State wins this one 38-14.
Yeah, so pretty dominant victory. I have K-State winning 35-7. I don't think that BYU's offense is capable of doing a whole lot up against this K-State defense because they want to establish a running game. They want to have that play action passing game. But here's the problem. You have to be able to run the ball to do that. And this is, without a doubt, the toughest task that Ratzlaff has faced this entire year. This is arguably the first semi-conscious team that BYU has faced this year. And I think that for all the disadvantages that K-State has, and it's all being small stuff, BYU arguably having not really played anyone, they may not be prepared for an immediate punch to the face, which I feel like K-State is more than capable of delivering. But like I said, it's all about avoiding the snowball, because if you let any team in the Big 12 start snowballing you at home by making a single mistake early, that's going to compound and make things a whole hell of a lot harder. So play mistake-free football, don't get in your own head, and just have some fun out there. It's a beautiful environment. You can't drink, but it's still beautiful there. So maybe the lack of drink will make you remember the scenery better.
Have some chocolate milk and enjoy the view.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to put it, Connor. Have some chocolate milk and enjoy the view. Also, we'll count this as a sort of wacky segment of the week, but and this is something that I just personally have been thinking about. Connor, what do you think of Cosmo? BYU's mascot. Yes.
Wildly impressive and a little intimidating.
That was, yeah. I was going to go with wildly impressive because I don't know who they keep getting to play Cosmo, but every single time that they get someone to play Cosmo, I always see him doing something impressive.
Yeah, it's always some incredible feat of athleticism or strength. Yeah.
So I think the real matchup here that we need to watch is Willie Wildcat up against Cosmo. So who do you have? What's the tail of the tape here between Willie Wildcat and Cosmo the Cougar?
Based off their highlight tapes alone, honestly, it's probably Cosmo, I think. But I guess it depends on if Willie's been studying film this week, because I do think that Willie does have a little bit of an advantage with opposable thumbs. So that may help him against Cosmo. But Cosmo is a force to be reckoned with in terms of pure strength and athleticism. So Willie's going to have a tall task in front of him this week.
Yeah, to me, it all comes down to the mental game, because I know that Cosmo is going to have that athletic advantage. He also has a much smaller head, which makes those athletic feats much harder to, or much easier to accomplish. However, on the mental side of it, Willie's head is much bigger for a much bigger brain. So I think the winning formula for Willie Wildcat is to outthink and perhaps pull some Deus Ex Machina up against Cosmo the Cougar. But my official projection for the bout of Willie Wildcat up against Cosmo is a narrow Cosmo victory, just because I feel like in that rock, paper, scissors matchup, I feel like Cosmo is just going to continually pick rock because it is the strongest, and Willie is going to overthink it. So I unfortunately, I think I have to give the edge to Cosmo in the one-on-one there.
Not a bad pick at all. I mean, there's a abundance of aggressive feline mascots in this conference now, so hopefully we'll continue to see some additional matchups here in the future. We just had one last week, Wildcat on Wildcat. So now we got Cougars, and we'll got Houston Cougars later. So plenty of aggressive felines going around right now.
You have any final thoughts, Connor?
No, I don't ever think.
I don't either. So thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. If you want to follow or contact the show, you can follow us just about anywhere at Aggieville Alleycats. And if you want to email us, we're AggievilleAlleycats@gmail.com. If you want to follow us on a more personal note, I am at ACEdwards00.
I'm at Connor Bouts, Store Capital, C Capital B.
And if you want to support the show financially, please be sure to check out both the official supporters link and the merch store, both found in our podcast and Twitter bios. But most importantly, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. Where come rain, shine, or anything in between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. Stay safe, Alley.